And greetings and welcome to, well, it's a big day. Welcome to the season premiere. That sounds very official. The season premiere of the QCast. So this is the first episode of season 4. I appreciate everyone that has been along this fun little journey of the last 3 seasons. The seasons are generally correlated with like school years. So we're in a new school year. We have to have a new season. This is season 4, episode 1. We've had 83 shows the last 3 seasons. Sincerely appreciate all the support. I thought it would be a great way to kick off season 4 with the chair of the National Men's Basketball Committee, Mr. Luke Flockerzi, the head men's basketball coach at Rochester. And Luke, you were on the QCast last year, so we won't do a Rochester related QCast. This is going to be more national chair. But that said, in your day job as the head coach at Rochester, pretty exciting time of year as we start to kind of feel D3 hoop season coming up. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It is an exciting time. It's a first for Division III basketball coaches where we made a switch legislatively to 114 days for our season instead of the 19 weeks, and we're able to use 8 of those days as non-traditional kind of out-of-season days. So a little bit more access to our team earlier in the school year is been positive. And I think if you think back to your time as a first year student at Illinois Wesleyan, like, the fact that you can actually start learning basketball and getting acclimated right when you get to campus versus October 15th is a huge head start for them. And just a fun time to be doing Division III hoops.
The practices that you're able to have right now, and you guys, you've already had some, correct? You guys have already started, yes?
Yep. So basically, you're at school calendar. When your school year starts, you're able to use those non-traditional days, and whatever triggers a day, you basically anything you would do during the season, you can do.
That's what I was going to
You know,
ask. So you can do a full practice, whatever you kind of practice you would do in the season, you can do now using these days, right?
Yep, team bonding, practice, lifting, watching film, individual meetings about basketball. I mean, anything that would be fair game during the season counts during these days, and it's fun.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, again, we'll leave this conversation to be more about your men's basketball committee chair role as we move forward. But I definitely wanted to chat a little bit about the exciting changes to the practice season. So last season, Luke, you were the vice chair for Sarah Quattrocki on the national committee, and this year you're the guy, right? So you're in charge. What's the going into this role? And I know you've had a long time to think about this and get ready. I know you guys are already starting to do work. What's your outlook on heading into this role for the season? Let's start there, and then we'll drill down into some more detailed stuff.
Yeah, I think Division III basketball right now is just at a really exciting time. I mean, the caliber of play, the level of student athlete, the talent that we have in Division III basketball is just exceptional. And so just really looking forward to the 23-24 season and everything that will bring in addition to what hopefully is another great tournament. I mean, we were very lucky last year having possession games at the Final
Right.
Four and the buzzer beater that Christopher Newport and Trey Barber in the championship game. So if we can have another run like that this season, I think I'll be pretty happy.
It really was an amazing Final Four in Fort Wayne. Of course, you mentioned the buzzer beater and the way Christopher Newport came away with the title. Um, when you look back on last season, do you feel like everything committee wise went smooth? Is there anything that you take from last year where you say, we got to get that in a little better place as we move forward? We didn't count on that happening. We need to do this differently. Or how do you look back as you start to look forward?
Yeah, it's what we're doing is not perfect. There's some natural kind of things that aren't specific to men's basketball, that are specific to Division III membership and the way that NCAA tournaments work at our level. And so, like, we can't take ownership for all that, but the things that are in our control as a men's basketball committee, I think it's been a very high achieving group. The leadership has been exceptional. Having Sarah Quattrocki be the chair last year as the first female chair was really exciting. Obviously Mike Shower before that, Sam Atkinson before that. We've just had some exceptional leadership that I hope to kind of continue. And it's a high achieving group. Our national committee takes their job very seriously. We have a lot of fun, but we want to get it right, and we want to do right by everybody and have the best championship we can. And so I think looking forward, that's our goal again. And we're going to work hard to do everything we can to have the best championship.
When you listed those names of kind of your predecessors, there has been a incredible level of transparency. I'm just starting with, like, thinking back to Sam. He was on Hoopsville many times, and Mike, was on this program many times, and Hoopsville and other places, and Sarah, the same. She was awesome. Is that in your role, do you view that as important for kind of the message to get out and for people to understand how the process works? I assume it is, because here you are, but talk about just your role in communicating and being transparent.
Yeah, I think the biggest complaints we have in regard to the championship are just lack of awareness of how the process works. And so, I've really tried to focus on the educational piece. What call it transparency or whatever you want. I mean, we're not behind a veil here. The
Right.
the criteria is out there, and how we're interpreting the criteria has been very public. And I think we're doing everything we can to be consistent with our approach. And so, the issues are more when people don't understand how it works,
Right.
right? And so, I've talked to Mike Shower about in his NABC role now about possibly partnering and help educate coaches. They're not immune. Very often the best coaches in Division III don't really fully understand how the selection process works, and so that shouldn't be. And so if I can do anything to educate, to help in that process, if you want to call it be more transparent, that's kind of our goal. We want people to understand what we're doing, how we're doing it, and anyone outside looking in who understands and knows what the criteria is should be able to put the pieces together. And that's not something that we want to be a different way. We want people to understand how we got to our end conclusions.
And at the towards the end, I'll have some questions for you, just observations about kind of the impact that this level of education is having in a great way. Just people scheduling in a different way. We'll get to that in a second, but it's, I believe, from an outsider standpoint, that I'm seeing the level of communication and transparency and education making a very, very positive difference across the country, which has been awesome. Let's start with kind of the structure of your committee. You're the head of a committee essentially, and I guess the way I would describe it, and tell me if I get this wrong, is you have 10 regional advisory committees. There's 10 regions in Division III basketball. So you have someone that leads a rack, and then they have a team under them. But all of those leads of the racks, all 10, become a member of the national committee. And so if you would, walk us through, because I know the names change potentially from year to year. Who are your rack leads across those 10 regions this season?
Yeah, it's a year of pretty significant transition. We lost four members of our national committee who were very key pieces, and so we're replacing them with four new ones who I'm sure will do an exceptional job. But there's going to be a learning curve there. And to boot, we our national liaison had a job opportunity
Saw
that
that.
he took, and so we're going to be working with a new liaison as well this year. So even internally, and there's going to be a learning curve and some education that goes on. But Region 1 is Paul Booth. He's the head coach at Norwich University. Booth, he does a great job for us. Region 2 is a new member, Stephanie Dollar. She's the deputy AD at UMass Boston. She has a really good basketball background, though, working with the WBCA for a number of years. So that's great. I still serve as the chair of the RAC. RAC is what we abbreviate it. The regional advisory committees as the RAC in Region 3. Region 4 is John Alisi. He's the head coach at Baruch College. Region 5 is a familiar face. Gary Stewart is the assistant AD head men's basketball coach at Stevenson University, but he's stepping on in Rick Ferry's spot. He's had some significant leadership roles with the NABC, and we're really excited to have him join our committee. Region 6 is obviously Sarah Quattrocki stepped off. So Danny Miller is I think the deputy AD down at Averett University. So that's a new member. Region 7 is David McGrail at Penn State Altoona, head men's basketball coach there. Region 8 is the athletic director at St. Norbert College in Wisconsin, Cam Fuller. Region 9 is another new one. Tim Groves is the assistant AD and head men's basketball coach at Northwestern. And then lastly, Region 10 is Doc. Doc S. Slinger is the head men's basketball coach at Caltech. So they serve on the national committee. They are the chairs of their regional advisory committees, and depending on how many conferences are in each region, will be the size of their advisory committee. And so they kind of do a lot of the legwork and kind of pass information along to the national committee before we get to those regional rankings. So it's kind of
And it's a lot of work, right, Luke? I mean, taking on this responsibility, this isn't like a 10 minutes a week kind of side gig here while they're doing their other job, whether they're an AD or whether they're the head coach or whether they're whatever. I mean, talk about the time commitment that goes into being part of these committees. I know it's pretty darn significant.
Yeah, it starts with just an awareness of what's going on, right? So we track a lot of games. We try to watch as many games as we can, but really, it's the last 6 weeks of the season where the commitment's large. You know, it's kind of Sunday night through Tuesday afternoon before our regional rankings are released on Tuesday afternoon. It is pretty heavy. And so a national committee member rather, is going to start with a lot of heavy work Sunday into Monday with their regional group. And then we spend a lot of time on Tuesday morning as a national group, kind of finalizing our regional rankings and publicizing those early in the week. So, we know what games are counting and what aren't, and just kind of track the week ahead.
And for those that get a chance to come to Fort Wayne, you get a chance to interact with the members of the committee who are all there, and you really do get a sense of how important this is to them. And while we all have debates on various decisions that are made, that's going to be natural at any level of this process. I mean, you have people that invest their whole season into doing this and trying to do it as well as they can. And so, again, encourage everyone to jump into this and learn how it works. And that's why we're here today with Luke to kind of dig into that. By the way, there's 3 people that fell off. I never knew there'd be a natural progression from the national committee to the QCast. But are you aware that 3 of these people, Sarah, Rick, and Ryan, Sarah Quattrocki, Rick Ferry, Ryan Kane, they're now going to be part of a QCast series called In the Room, where while you're doing the real work with your real committee, these 3 are going to be coming on this show just as random yahoos like me and kind of like commenting on like, this is what we think Luke and his committee are doing this week. Are you aware that this is happening out there? Have you heard of this?
I love the commercial break and plug here, but yeah, it's exciting programming, and it should be a pretty entertaining group. Obviously they did great work, but they're a fun group to talk basketball with, and I think it'll be a great value add to our landscape of things to watch and listen to.
So everyone stay tuned for In the Room, which will premiere, I don't know when, sometime soon. We'll get that going. Sarah, Rick, and Ryan, that's going to be fun. Luke, tell us a little bit about the allocation of the 64 bids by pools. So pool A, pool B, pool C. If I recall last year, I think there were 20 pool C's and the rest were all pool A's. I don't think there was a pool B. What does that look like this year? I know there's been a lot of conference changes that may have changed all that. And so what does the 64 look like this year?
Yeah, so pool A's are our AQs, our automatic qualifiers. Basically, every league that meets the criteria is offered an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament, and so that's the bulk of the teams that are in the NCAA tournament. We're at 42 of those conferences this year. Pool B's are schools that don't necessarily have an affiliation to a league, and if there's a certain quantity of pool B's, kind of independents, so to speak, they're also guaranteed representation. And this cycle, there aren't enough Pool B institutions, unfortunately. A couple of the Pool Bs closed. And so there is now Pool B bid this year. And then lastly, the one we spend the most time talking about is obviously the Pool Cs, which is the at-large bids that we select as a national committee through this process. And so this year, excitingly, there will be 2 more. There's going to be 22 at-large bids. We lost 2 leagues. The Colonial States kind of morphed into some other conferences. the Colonial States is no longer, and then the New England Collegiate Conference is also not qualifying for an AQ anymore. So those are kind of the major changes.
And so it's 42. Did you say there was a pool B or there's not a pool B?
There's not a
There's
pool
not.
B, so
Okay.
there's
42,
42
42 and 22.
AQs and 22 to gets us to our field of 64.
And I know that the changing conference stuff, there's a lot happening behind the scenes with conferences, and that's again that directly impacted some of the numbers here. But is that something that you guys pay attention to as a committee in the off season, like what's going on with leagues, or you just kind of you look at what the landscape is when they give you the allocations and go from there? I'm just curious how much you guys dig into that stuff.
Yeah, pretty much the latter. I think, if there's a general Division III awareness, I think, of any coach who does it at this level. But there's leagues that are coming up that will be getting AQs in the next several years, and so those numbers do fluctuate a little bit from year to year.
Let's talk a little bit about the criteria, and these are always good conversation. This starts to get into people understanding how the process works. First thing is to clarify, you and your committee do not make this criteria. So you guys are given, a guidebook that says, here's the rules. Now you guys go run a committee using these rules. Before I move any further, am I saying that correctly, that you are not building the criteria?
Yeah, there's a NCAA committee called the Championships Committee, similar makeup of I would think 8 to 10 members, and they kind of review how championships work and what the criteria are, and a lot of the things that we were discussing aren't specific to just men's basketball or just basketball. They're kind of rules and regulations and criteria across the board of all sports, and every sport has their own nuance, but a lot of what we're working with is what's been given to us and not necessarily specific to men's basketball.
So a lot of times when we get into these conversations, like I'm going to ask Luke his opinion on a few of these things, but at the end of the day, changing the way the criteria works or changing formulas or that kind of thing isn't actually even in the scope of this committee. This committee's charge is interpreting and using the criteria. So I think that's really important thing, because a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people think that you guys have made the SOS calculation or whatever. Getting into the criteria, and it's been a few months since I thought about all this, and so there's 5 primary criteria which drive, in my words, drive like 97% of the decision, and it's winning percentage, strength of schedule, results versus regionally ranked opponents, head-to-head play, and common opponents. I assume those 5 things are still in place for this coming season. Is that correct, or anything new coming to the mix?
Yeah, those criteria have not changed, and then we would get to secondary criteria if needed. And um, getting back to your original point, there are, we try to evaluate what we're doing. We get feedback. We try to make improvements, and that's one of my biggest goals here as chair, is to try to do everything I can this cycle to improve what we're doing and make it the best possible. And so, we there's a process for that. Some of it's legislative, which would mean it would need to get approved by the membership, and then some of it are small tweaks we can make. And so there's some math details to the criteria that we're talking about that we've identified as incorrect, and we're trying hard to get those fixed. It's not a new kind of battle, but yeah, no, the primary criteria has not changed, and it's largely going to be the same as it has been in past years.
Then the way you guys take that criteria, and again, there's those 5 primary criterion, and then there's secondary. Is it fair to say that an overwhelming majority of the evaluation happens within the primary? Like, how much does the secondary come in just on a ballpark average basis?
Rarely, I think we say there's 5 too, but when we're talking about at-larges and we're talking about selections, and we're making cross-regional comparisons, it very often gets boiled down to just
Right.
2 or 3 criteria that are coming, 3 criteria that are coming into play, which is the win-loss percentage, the SOS, and the results versus regional ranked opponents, which is kind of the bulk of the conversation.
So then using those, so again, you've got the five, but there seems to be three that really jump out. Um, how do you kind of weigh the criterion against each other when there's nothing in the handbook that says that winning percentage is 70% and then SOS is 20% and RROs is, how do you take all those things and evaluate them together to make these decisions? In general terms, how does that play out?
Yeah. So in full transparency, like I think that's one of the things that people who do have an understanding of the process get frustrated with, is because there is kind of an identity to every committee, whether it be men's basketball, women's basketball, or other sports. There is some fluctuation. And so what really was the impetus for me to get involved in this was I was a little frustrated as a coach. I thought one year there was, a really heavy emphasis on that win-loss percentage, and then the next year there was a heavy emphasis on strength of schedule. And so we were kind of on the losing end of both of those changes. And so I think we as a men's basketball committee have worked very hard to kind of keep a stationary target, so to speak. And so we're very clear that all five primary criteria are equal. There's not one criteria that's more important than the other. But we will tell you that, obviously, winning games matters. And so, that win-loss criteria is probably the most common logical starting place to compare teams is, how have you won your games? All right. And so I talk, and this is just me. This is my personal kind of perspective on it. I talk about SOS as being a kind of a balance to that win loss percentage. And so you're going to take those two categories, and they speak to each other, right? And so if someone's won a bunch of games but played a relatively easy schedule, that means something compared to the inverse of someone who's played a really hard schedule but maybe has won a couple less games. But winning gets you to the table, and really that's where we start to factor in the other criteria as we make our comparisons.
These are my words, but is it fair to say that like winning percentage is a starting point? Again, it gets you to the table. SOS and RROs tend to kind of help that conversation, and then the head to head and the common opponent almost becomes sort of a tiebreaker. I know I'm using just my words, but
Yeah.
in general, am I close in how those things are used?
Well, let's stay away from those words. So tiebreaker. So I won't share names, but there's a very prominent kind of successful tournament college coach who came to me last year and said, "Oh, I thought head to head was a tiebreaker." It is not. It is an equal part of the primary criteria, and it gets factored into the totality of the resume as we kind of compare teams. But I think a way to think about it, and let's just talk more about this and try to give more context, right? Is the win-loss percentage and the SOS are kind of like a balance, right? And we find a level where we understand what they both mean. We talk a lot about SOS numbers, right? And
Yeah,
like a 500 SOS, right? What does that actually mean? Well, that's your average opponent has a 500 record, right?
hmm,
They've only won half of their games. So when people complain about an SOS that's in the 400s, I mean, your average opponent has a losing record, right?
right,
And so that it's just common sense that a 20-win team that has played a 400 something SOS can't have the same value as a 20-win team that is over 600 SOS, right? Which
right.
means your average opponent is 15-10 or better, right? And so that's kind of what those two numbers are trying to balance out. And we spent a lot of time talking about kind of them out of context and just the numeric. And I don't think
Right.
we always understand exactly what we're saying when we're trying to balance out winning percentage and SOS.
Along that front, this question gets into not in your scope. This would be a championship committee thing. But would it be easier for you as a committee if the winning percentage and SOS weren't two different things, but rather like they were merged? And I would need the Snyders here with me to tell me how the math works, but like into like an RPI thing or whatever we call it, where that's just one number that's already pre-calculated. and then from there you do the RROs and whatever else. Would that make it easier on you if they were
Yeah.
mathematically merged into one?
Well, this is a slippery slope conversation because
That's my job. That's my job on the
a,
QCast.
there's a lot of conversation and evaluation right now about possibly moving to a database based criteria system selection process. We've referenced it in the past. It's called Pairwise,
Yeah.
and so that's a little bit along the lines of what moving to a system like that would include. The current system, there is some manual labor on it, but it's worked just fine for us.
And I don't know anything about Pairwise, but I was going to ask you about, like, do you think that's coming? So you already got out in front of that. I personally fear, and I don't know anything about Pairwise, that it's going to come and then we're all going to be mad and want back to where we were. So this may be a be careful what you wish for everyone out there that complains about numbers, but we'll see when it gets here. But you think that Pairwise is very much on the table in conversation behind the scenes right now? Like that's out there floating around.
Absolutely, and I don't think I'm sharing anything I shouldn't. The championships committee has done a lot of research on a database system for selections, and has reviewed it and has done some pilot studies and has presented kind of how it would work to different constituents, from conferences to chairs to racks. And so there's a lot of conversation. We're in an evaluation stage right now, where a feedback stage right now, where they're getting feedbacks from those groups and kind of pulling all that feedback and seeing where that takes us. But I do think it's definitely on the table, and would not be surprised if that's the direction we go. What I know for a fact is 23-24 we will be using the current criteria and our current selection process, and so after that it's kind of TBD at this stage.
Gotcha. As far as winning percentage in SOS, this is something that we discuss every year. I think this is where we just get into, how does the committee from year to year evaluate these things? SOS generally, it seems to me that I don't have the data in front of me, but no one to my knowledge has ever been picked for a pool C bid that has an SOS that is under 0.500. There's never been one in the fours. When we look at winning percentage, interestingly, the biggest debate last year involved the team that you're the head coach of, right? So Rochester was picked with a 640 winning percentage, but with almost like record setting SOS and RRO. I actually have a database of like the last 10 years or something. And I want to say there's only been one team that had better SOS and better RROs. So when you look at like floors and ceilings and whatever we want to call it, are you in favor of your committees drawing a line in the sand and saying, hey, anything under 0.667 just isn't competitive on the winning percentage, so let's start there? Or are you more in favor of just having the numbers be the numbers and having everything be evaluated together? Like, where do you stand on having some floors and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so let's be clear, there are no floors. All right,
Right.
there's nothing prescribed to us that you couldn't be selected if your SOS is under 500, or if your winning percentage is under 667. Those are very frequently kind of things that are thrown out there.
Mm-hmm.
Those don't exist. Right, and so when we're working selecting pool Cs, we're looking at the totality of the resume. So when you mentioned someone who is really strong in let's say two of those three categories that we've talked about, that has to still have weight, right? And vice versa. So I like in life in general, I like kind of living in the gray, because then you don't kind of box yourself in. But I do think for our work, and from a transparency standpoint, my personal opinion, not my committee's opinion, is that a really low floor in those categories would help our work, right? It would make it more streamlined. Last year wasn't as big of an issue as 2 years ago when we were ranking too many teams, right?
Yeah.
That would have been really helpful 2 years ago, when we were ranking teams that had like a 451 SOS, because there weren't better options in that region to be ranked. Those teams never got selected, but we had to rank them regionally because we were ranking so many teams. So I've always like toyed with the idea, and I've maybe mentioned it to you in the past, but what if we just said, gave a floor, 475 SOS and a 650 winning percentage,
Right.
you can't be ranked if you're below those, right? And if that means all of a sudden Region 7 only has 6 ranked teams because they don't have 7 teams that meet those floors, so be it. But that's kind of a out of the box idea that
Right.
I don't think it has legs or is going anywhere, especially when the conversation might be moving to something else, anyways. So
And I think at the end of the day, this is where you want the committee to have the ability to look at everything and make the right decision. The same folks that want the floors. I'm sure at some point I've thrown that out there too. You're going to get in a situation where a certain team that's under your floor has some crazy results in the other things where you're like they should be in. They're one of the best teams. So I think overall the way I look at it is you trust the committee to use all the criteria and make the best decisions. But I think that's always a hot topic every year. But I guess it's a hot topic at every level of the selection process. In Division One, that's how this thing goes. Is there's always debates at the end between this resume versus that. Um, with the regionally ranked opponents, I think one of the tricky things is that not all of the regions are as strong as each other. And I guess without getting into some comments that I can't support with data, I'm going to use an example. Last year, I don't think Region 2 had a Pool C. Now, I might check that and be wrong, but let's just pretend. Like, so not every region, top to bottom, in men's basketball is equal. So the way we look at these RROs gets a little bit skewed. You could have one region where it's easier to have an RRO win than another. How do you apply the RRO criteria knowing that not everything is even across those 10 regions, if that question makes sense?
yeah, so our committee has publicized over the last several years that like we're looking for quality, right? Like we want quality wins, we want quality results, we want people who've gone out there and challenged themselves. I think one of the most exciting things about Division Three men's basketball right now is that interregional play has grown dramatically. You see teams from Texas playing in the Northeast, and
Absolutely.
and vice versa, and teams from New York playing out in Illinois. So it's that part gives us more data points where there is interregion comparison, and we are able to use more than just those 3 categories in our comparison and get to 4 or 5 categories. So that part's exciting. Not every regional ranked win is equal, and so we've talked about this in the past. Like if you beat the number 1 team in the nation, who's the number 1 regionally ranked team, that has to be more important than beating the last ranked team in like the weakest region,
Right.
right? And so those aren't equal. 5 and 4 regional results versus regional ranked opponent versus a 5 and 4 versus regional ranked opponent category could be a landslide for one team based
Right.
on what those actual results are. And so that's why it's so time intensive, right? Is we're taking time as a committee to really dive in and see what the data is telling us in those categories. And so um, you know, the top 16 reveal that we've done a number of years has been a really good conversation point because
Right.
it does give some quantitative quality to some results versus regional ranked opponents. So if you have a top 16 win on the road, like that's going to be impactful in the comparison. And so I think I answered your question, but that's it's not perfect because you're 5th ranked team in the weak region is going to have a completely different resume than your 5th ranked team in the strongest region. But we know that, and that's getting factored into whatever degree.
So when you compare like RROs that are 4 and 3 versus each other, you're digging into the 4, digging into the 3. How about the side of it where in some regions they are so deep and strong that teams end up not being ranked? Like in my opinion, Region 7, if I was on the championships committee somehow I'd be lobbying for another ranked spot in Region 7. Last year, I can't remember if it was like Calvin didn't end up being ranked, but they would have been ranked in any other region, for example. Even
Yeah,
so, Region 8, where my school exists, at the bottom of that region was a lot weaker than the bottom of Region 7. So what happens when you've got a situation like that where, let's say, Wabash doesn't end up ranked? They're a great team that would have been ranked elsewhere, and Worcester has 2 wins over Wabash. And because Wabash falls out, that hurts Worcester. Like, is there anything you guys can do with that, or it is what it is?
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to that question. This is one of the things that's across the board, right? This isn't specific to men's
Right.
basketball. We don't determine how many teams are in each region. We don't determine how many teams are ranked in each region. So we're still where we were last year. We have 69 teams ranked. Every region has 7 ranked teams, with the exception of Region 2, which only ranks 6. There's only 3 conferences in Region 2, which is why they rank less. But Region 7 has been the easiest place to point, right? They have 49 teams in Region
Right.
7, and they only rank 7, compared to another region who has a lot less. And so I don't want to diminish it, because obviously getting that last ranked team helps others' resumes, and it's like a constant moving target, right? So if Calvin gets ranked, then all of a sudden someone's resume changes for the better and someone's resume
Yeah.
changes for the worse. And so it does factor in. But when you think about the actual selection process, if a team is ranked 8th and so not on the board, if that region is that strong, the teams in front of them are going to come off the board very quickly, and that team will get to the table, right? And
True.
so when it comes to the selection process, we are selecting nationally. It's not like, oh, we got to get a team from every region. And so that's where it comes into play, I think, is that team will make it to the board. Now, it won't count as a regional ranked result, but they'll get their chance at the table if they really have that strong a resume, when you're doing a national comparison. So there's kind of two sides to that coin.
That helps. That helps. And yeah, some of this, again, we have criteria, and there's, you guys don't create it. There's some quirkiness to it when you go from sport to sport to sport. And this stuff isn't all just about men's basketball. If we looked at this from a women's basketball standpoint, they would have totally different issues regarding the regions, but similar problems. Geography, just to make sure we cover this, when you guys are making a bracket, you don't have unlimited ability to fly people where you can't seed the tournament 1 to 64 and have one play 64 and two play 63. There's certain limitations related to budget, et cetera, in Division 3. I think everyone knows that, but just talk about that, Luke, a little bit, if you would, how geography comes into the bracketing side of this.
Yeah, so there's no doubt that the Division 3 membership and geographic landscape provides some hurdles, right? Region 10 is from Texas all the way up to the northwest of the country, right? So when I was a prospective college student, I went through this, right? I'm from the Mountain West region, and at the time there was one Division 3 school in the entire Mountain West region. So I was going west or east if I wanted to go play Division 3 sports, right? So that landscape hasn't changed, and again, that's not a men's basketball issue. What I can say is, like, we're fully aware of it, and within our powers, we want to do everything possible to kind of try to be creative and try to come up with creative new ideas to try to alleviate some of the pressures that those island regions have felt. We aren't mandated with a flight limit. Our charge is to kind of, within reason, do whatever we can to
Right.
limit flights. And so it's kind of a gray area. So I can promise our committee is going to do everything we can to push to make the best bracket we can, and try to factor in some of those island regions, and come up with new creative ways to deal with that problem that's not a men's basketball problem. So
Yeah, like last year, I went down first weekend, drove down to from Dallas to Belton to watch the regional at Mary Hardin Baylor. I thought that one jumped out to me as one that, if it was Division 1, those teams would have been split up more. It was St. Thomas, Mary Hardin Baylor, East Texas Baptist, and Shriner. And probably if I had to point out a team like ETBU, they ended up with a super, super tough draw that, if it was purely seeded, they probably deserved better, but it kind of is what it is. It also, isn't it true, Luke, that like upsets that happen late impact a lot of this stuff? Because I thought the Texas pod and the California stuff could have ended up better had not things ended up the way they did the final weekend. So you're kind of at the mercy of who gets in as Pool A. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, so completely honestly, I have not been part of the bracketing the last 2 years, which has been a good problem to have for me. But I do think there was kind of another idea in place until the final results, and then that wasn't possible anymore. So
Right.
the we have been mindful of this as a committee. We've tried to make adjustments, and so I know we've had California teams in Georgia, in the Midwest, and in the kind of East Coast this year. So those are all ways of trying to keep things new and kind of mix things up and give people some different opportunities. But it is a big hurdle, and it's something that we're mindful of, and we want to do the best we can. And so within reason, we're going to push to do whatever we can to make up for some of those island regions and give them the best hand we can.
Yeah, I remember last year I was trying to make mock brackets, and I remember mine was totally blown up once like Shriner got in. And what happened out in the Skyac? Did Kalu get in late? Well, whatever happened in the Skyac was kind of a curveball at the end. And I remember I couldn't figure out how to do it any differently than what you guys did. One more
So,
question.
but before we move on, I'm old enough to know, like I coached during the NCAA tournament when it was truly regional, right? And
Right,
so, we are making progress. It is a little bit glacial, but we have such a more national bracket with so many more exciting matchups and games than we used to have. A Northeast team could only get to the Final Four if they beat all the other Northeast teams in
right.
the past, and it's not that way anymore. And so we should celebrate those successes and keep working hard to improve what we can year to year and make it as national and as fair and competitive a bracket as we can.
That is a great point, and one that I make every year is the Division 2 bracket is still completely regional. So
Yeah.
if you look at the way that the D2 and they send their eight all to the same place, they do like an Elite Eight, but those eight are all coming from the one team that wins each of the regions. So we truly have a national bracket. If you look at I can't remember which team Pomona Pitzer got flown out to play in round one, but it was someone in the Northeast. And
Were
I
they
can,
St. Joe's maybe with Williams? Were they there?
yeah, it
Yeah.
was right. It was there. Yeah. If you look at our bracket, it is incredibly national. And I do remember I was a fan, Luke, during that time you're talking about where like I remember say like the Midwest would be paired with the South. And so whoever came out of the Midwest, played whoever came out of the South. And that's not, we have so much of a better system now that I hope people just take a step back and appreciate, in my opinion, how much better this is than it used to be. And even I'll just say over what I see from the Division 2 bracketing process, like we have a lot more freedom and flexibility. So just my opinion. Couple more questions, just one more getting back to a little bit related to RROs. One of the things that my friends at the D3 Datacast, so Matt and Zach Snyder, by the way, I'll plug, they had an episode 42 and it was called Fixing the Primary Criteria. Now, again, that's not Luke's job, but I hope that the championship committee watched episode 42 of the Datacast. But one of their points was like, instead of results versus regionally ranked opponents, what if it was results versus like RPI top 70 or 100 or something? Again, not your decision to change, but I think there is an RPI that exists behind the scenes. Does that ever come into play at all, or that's just not part of the equation?
No, I mean, backing up to your first point, like obviously the Snyders do a great job. They've added so much to our landscape, so I'm sure that plug is a great one. But it is our job. It is my job to try to push for positive change, right, in what we're doing. And so the Snyders kind of critique of the primary criteria and ways to fix it are conversations that are being had. They're things we're pushing for. Like I said earlier in our conversation, some of them are legislative changes, which are a lot harder to change in a slower process. But anything we can just fix we're trying hard to fix. All right. And so we're not rolling onto this committee and kind of going through the motions and rolling off. Like, we want to try to make it the best we can and try to improve our championship. And I think my predecessors have done that, and we're trying hard to make some of those improvements. So, uh, again, this is a slippery slope conversation. The RPI, the pairwise conversation comes into play here, where that system would factor in kind of results versus regionally ranked opponents in a different way. It's very much a
Gotcha.
national comparison, where it is almost like its own RPI. Just when we would be hoping that the database was a lot more
Right.
robust than what an RPI number would give you.
That's very helpful and fair. Maybe one final question. Let's see if you have anything that we left out. Scheduling. I have noticed that in the last 3, 4, 5 years that teams have really taken the information you guys are providing about the process, and they are using that in their scheduling strategies. A few that just off the top of my head come to mind. Barry has made tremendous changes to their schedule after being left on the table due to what I assume would be SOS. Maryville of Tennessee, the last 2 years, the schedule they've built, same thing after not making it due to SOS. Yeshiva, I mean, all of a sudden Yeshiva is playing a whole bunch of national powers on their schedule, which is really cool. You mentioned that earlier, but I have to believe you're supportive of all these cross-region cool matchups that we seem to be seeing more and more of. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think, again, our charge kind of as the committee is, we're looking for quality, and we want you to go challenge yourself, and we want you to win some of those games. And that speaks to why you should be in the NCAA tournament. And so, one of the analogies I've used a lot is, any basketball coach at this level wants their admissions office to be one that searches for reasons to admit a student, right? Versus the opposite, reasons to reject or not admit a
Yep.
student, right? I think our committee stance is very much in line with that concept, which is like, we want to look for that quality and the reason to say, all right, this team deserves this opportunity, versus like, oh, that's a bad loss, let's eliminate them from consideration. So, that messaging has been very clear from us, and whether that's been a direct result of some of these schedules that you mentioned or not, I think what is happening in Division III basketball is that interregion play, the exciting matchups that we're seeing as a result, and the teams that are going out and playing tough games and winning are largely being rewarded. So, that's kind of where we stand.
And there's a ton of great tournaments out there. So for any coaches listening, I mean, I'm sure everyone knows this better than I do, but like you have the d3hoops.com Classic in Las Vegas, which is a great place to go. You've got Ryan's tournament, the Great Lakes Invitational, which is an 8-teamer, which is phenomenal. There's that cool tournament. Luke, remind me, are you guys in the tournament, the UAA tournament with like Hopkins and Swarthmore? Is that this year? Does that start?
This year they're playing a Scholars Classic, I think they're calling it, where
Like,
Hopkins
and
and Swarthmore are playing WashU and NYU.
yeah, so like cool tournaments like that are happening where people are being creative. So whether it's going to these, many of the Illinois Wesleyan has the Jack Sycamore tournament, which is a national tournament where great programs come in. So whether it's finding one of these established tournaments or getting creative, and making your own, those are all great things, and there's more and more of them. Just one more question, the timing wise and next step. So we're here in September, later September. What happens next with your committee? Like, when do you guys get things geared up, and what's the next step for you guys?
We'll have a couple committee meetings just preparing for our process, the dates, the timing. We'll have some training that goes on with our new members. And then we'll have some kind of rack trainings as well, where we're having committee calls with the regional advisory committees, just getting set up for the season. But the bulk of the work kind of starts halfway through January, where we start to do a practice ranking. The alphabetical ranking is still a thing, followed by our public regional rankings, all the way up until selections.
We've covered a lot of stuff, Luke, and again, I appreciate all of the candidness and transparency through this. It's making a huge difference. 22 pool Cs, my goal in life really is to get all the pool Cs right. I've never done it. I've been within one the last many years. I think 22. If I can't get 20, I'm very worried about 22. But know that I will be grinding very hard on that front. But in all seriousness, really thank you for everything you're doing out there. I think people are excited to have the season coming up so soon. It feels like it's close. What would you leave QCast listeners and D3 Nation with as we close out the QCast season premiere of season 4?
There's a couple things. So again, a lot of this is educational, and I'll do as many of these as I can to help people understand how the process works. The fact that you are getting a 19 out of 20, the fact that the Pairwise pilot is getting this 19 out of the same 20 that we're getting, you know, people who understand how the process works are getting to the same conclusions, and we're not trying to be veiled. You know, that's our goal, is like we want anyone who understands to be able to understand why a team was selected and how they earned that opportunity. But we've had some great tournaments. Last year's bracket was phenomenal. Again, one of the most national brackets we've had,
Absolutely.
an amazing national championship game. We had 2 female officials for the first time ever, which was really exciting, and a female national chair. And now we're moving into hopefully another great cycle of basketball. I want to thank our kind of past national committee members. Scott Brown Jr. did an amazing job as our NCAA liaison in his time here, and we welcome a new liaison named Alex Dickey, who will come into play soon here. And so we're just moving forward to what is another great weekend in Fort Wayne to visit Fort Wayne people, and the Allen County War Memorial do an amazing job. I would encourage any Division III coach to plan to come to the Division III
Yeah.
Final Four. It's an environment that is growing. If I could snap a finger and change everyone to go to that, you know, it would be.
Yeah.
It really is a great weekend with a lot of educational opportunities and access, and so you know, come support our championship, and you know, I think it's an exciting time. But happy to answer any other questions moving forward. Appreciate this kind of platform to talk D3 hoops and our work on the national committee, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I look forward to checking in with you like I have in the past with Sarah and Mike as the season goes on. Maybe help educate people on what's going on at the time and what people need to remember. Also look forward to this group of randoms, Sarah, Ryan, and Rick, that are going to be part of In the Room. So another shout out and plug. That's going to be an interesting dynamic to see how that thing goes. That should be a blast. Folks, that is the season premiere of season 4 of the QCast. Luke Flockerzi is the head men's basketball coach at the University of Rochester. He coaches a powerhouse program, and he also has a side job of being the men's basketball national committee chair. Luke, best of luck to you guys, your team, as you get cranked up, and to your committee as we get this thing rolling. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Look forward to talking more soon.